Coming to you from the Star City, this is Scarlet Fever, a daily Nebraskan production.
So I was minding my business on a Wednesday afternoon. I was driving in my car, and I got hit with possibly the biggest just bomb that I've ever seen in my life. And it was probably news that I wasn't ready for, and I screamed in my car so much so that the driver next to me had to look over. Welcome to Scarlet Fever. Danny and Anthony here today.
Yes, sir.
It's good to get Anthony back into the fold. Been a little while since you've been here.
Yep, I'm happy to be here. It's good to be back.
I'm glad you're happy to be here because we got some things to get to today. But the news is not news anymore. It's just people trying to process what actually happened last week. But in case you've been living under a rock, the all-time winningest coach in college volleyball, four-time national champion, Big 12, Big 10 titles, John Cook hanging it up after 25 years at Nebraska, 7 years at Wisconsin, 32 years of college coaching.
Yeah, just absolutely shocking news. It's going to be one of those where were you moments, really. I mean, you gave your story. I was in this office literally about to leave, and I was just talking to some people around here, got the news, and yeah, me and Ben Beecham hopped on, got a breaking news story up, and it's still really just kind of hard to grasp even after all these days. I mean, just a true legend of the sport, hanging it up after a amazing career, and yeah, it's definitely wild.
So we are recording on February 2nd. Happy Groundhog Day. So if you've been continuing to rewatch this, it's not my fault. But so the way we're going to do this, because this is such a massive story, we're going to split this up. So this week on this episode you're watching or listening to right now, you're going to focus specifically on John Cook himself, and then the next time that you see us, we'll actually dive in a little bit into Danny Busboom-Kelly and what she's bringing to Lincoln, some of her past. But today we want to actually give John Cook his due diligence and talk about him for a little while. But like you said, the news was just it was very unexpected. And I know there was a range of emotion that everyone was dealing with, from complete shock to why is this happening? There was a lot going on that I think people were thinking, and it really wasn't just what in our little bubble that we have here in Lincoln. We all have this center-minded feeling like John Cook is as Troy Dannon put it, the psychological leader of the state. But for a lot of people outside that really just started to get into this sport, or even just women's sports in general, John Cook was kind of seen as one of those spearheaded pioneers, especially with the start of the stadium match, that really started to invest in this ballooning of women's sports interest across the country.
Absolutely. I mean, just looking at, the overall growth in just women's sports and volleyball these last couple years, and it's just amazing that all these eyes are now getting on these sports that have really deserved that attention, years before that, decades before that. And it's just really cool. And John Cook has always just been there, especially for volleyball, just as one of these pioneers, as one of the guys who just led the way and kind of just served as they're kind of like Nick Saban and stuff like that. And just one of those, Tom Osborne, he draws a lot of comparisons to that, both retiring from Nebraska after 25 years of coaching their teams. And yeah, it's just, he did so much for this program. He did so much for the sport, and it's really just been amazing to watch. And, everyone just respects him for it.
Not only has he done so much for the Nebraska volleyball program, but for Nebraska athletics as a whole. So this is really something that started to come to light in recent weeks, but Nebraska volleyball is one of the few women's sports that are actually profiting. Mm-hmm. They made about $1.3 million in the last fiscal year, and they're one of two or three. I know UConn women's basketball is another one. Iowa women's basketball was up there. Oklahoma softball was up there. I think Wisconsin
volleyball,
they were up there too. So But this has been going on for Nebraska since 2014, except for the COVID season where nobody was allowed in the venues, and they lost like nearly $2 million that season or something like that. But the stadium match obviously had a lot to do with it. But since moving to Devaney, the interest in this team just has continued to jump. And now that there's been revelations coming out that apparently they somehow found room to squeeze another 1,200 seats in there. I don't know how the heck they're going to do that to bring the capacity to 10,000 again. But a lot of that has to do because of what John Cook did for this program. Because you're going from back in Terry Pettit's days where you're standing outside the Coliseum after football games begging fans to go in for free to go watch the games to selling out the Coliseum, and now you have to move to an arena double the size.
Yeah, it's really amazing just to think about where Nebraska volleyball was at when he got there and where it is now. For our endowment, for the DN endowment, one of our stories we're doing is actually just talking more about by the numbers and what if Nebraska volleyball were to move to PBA, and like when. It's honestly not even a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I feel like
it feels like a when now.
And that's just really amazing just to even have this conversation about them, because if they were to go to PBA, they'd still do amazing numbers. They'd still have they'd by far have the best attendance in the country then, and they already have it now. They have that massive sellout streak. And it's just such a demand for Nebraska volleyball, and it's really kind of just a spectacle. I mean, they do their spring matches all across the state every year, and that's always just an amazing thing to see. And the volleyball day, Memorial Stadium was also obviously kind of the pinnacle of that, and it couldn't have been done without John Cook.
I like how you brought up the spring matches, though, because I think this is an interesting layer to this whole cake that we're building here. If you remember last year with the spring match, the game was supposed to be played at Kearney High, and that arena holds, I don't know, maybe 2,000, 2,500, not a huge number. And they ended up having to move the game to UNK because of the supposed demand for tickets. People were lining outside of the ticket office at UNK a day in advance, day and a half in advance. So even that just goes to show you what the commitment of the fans is like, and a lot of what Cook has done is bringing them all in. The sustained success is what's going to keep people around, and we're going to get to that in a moment. But the sustained success is what drives people to want to go to all different parts of the state to go watch it. I mean, he said in his press conference last week that they were scouting out Ord, Nebraska. That town only has 2,000 people in there. So you'd be expecting a massive influx of people to flock that township to go and watch that game. That's just the impact of migration that this program now has.
Yeah, for sure. That's what really made Volleyball Day so special, is just for a lot of the people at Memorial Stadium, they've been Nebraska volleyball fans their whole life and just haven't really had the opportunity to go see them live. I remember, I think ESPN did an article about it, like going in depth on just like certain people from small town Nebraska who, have never had the chance to go out to Lincoln and go to Devaney Center for a game. So that's what really brings the big intrigue for all these spring matches. And you mentioned just the fans earlier, the demand of it, and it's just really has been special to watch. I mean, I know there was multiple times this season where Nebraska football was playing, they have their sellout streak there, but then there's lines watching the game on their phones, waiting to get into Devaney Center for the volleyball game that night. And that's just, again, something you brought up earlier about how it used to be like, after the football game, go see the volleyball team play for free. There's people who are choosing that over football and just showing their commitment to the team.
It's pretty wild to see, but back on the Cook train for a second. We're talking about the all-time winningest coach in the sports history. That's pretty incredible to think about. I mean,
oh yeah.
He only had, I think, 103 losses in 25 years at Nebraska.
Jeez.
something. He was just over 100. It was like 102, 103, something like that. That's astounding. In 25 seasons, to only average 4 or 5 losses a year. The sustained success, we keep going back to the sustained success. And it's not that when he took over in 2000 that the program was in a bad place. Terry Pettit left it in a very good place.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big point of reason of why Terry Pettit wanted to leave in the way that he did, was to give his successor a good team to be able to build off of. And they went perfect in 2000 and won the national championship. Just goes to show what can happen if you leave the program in the right place. But it's not that team was in like shambles or anything like that when John Cook took over. He just took what Terry built and continued to he took the bungalow and built it into a mansion pretty much.
Yeah, it's just looking at his time at Nebraska, 4 national championships, 8 final championship game appearances, 12 Final Fours. He coached 72 All-Americans, several Olympians as well. So it's really just, again, Nebraska was already in a good spot when Terry Pettit passed the torch to John Cook, and he really just took them to a whole other level. And it was incredibly impressive, the fact that they've been able to sustain this for that long as well. They've been elite ever since he was the coach, and I do think that they'll still be elite going forward under DBK. I know that's for next week, but yeah, it's just he inherited the head coaching position already in a way better state than a lot of other programs, and then he's leaving it in as good of a state, if not better.
I think there's only one fair comparison to make to what John Cook has done, and that's what Nick Saban did at Alabama. For people that might not get the comparisons of volleyball to football, here's one for you. People always get upset that Alabama's in the college football playoff or the BCS national championship, whatever it is. 12 Final Fours in 25 years. That's incredibly difficult to do. When you think of it in this fashion, that non-conference schedules traditionally in volleyball are very difficult, especially for the top-rung teams, because the top-rung teams are usually the ones that are playing the second and third weekends of the tournament. You don't usually see a lot of 7, 8, 9 teams making it to the Elite Eight. That's just not really something you see. You have to be a top 12, 16 team to actually have a fighting chance to make it to the Final Four. That being said, Nebraska consistently was a top 4 seed line pretty much that entire time that he was here. I honestly can't recall a time where they were not at least hosting opening weekend games. Like, I know hosting the second weekend is only for the top 4 teams, but hosting the first weekend, that seemed like a yearly occurrence in Lincoln.
Oh yeah,
that's
for
incredibly tough to do, and to be able to keep that success.
Yeah, like I remember going back just a couple years ago, my freshman year, Nebraska hosted a first weekend, but then second weekend lost to, I think, Oregon in the Sweet 16. And again, like Sweet 16 for a volleyball school is just it's a great accomplishment, but that felt like, kind of like just.
And there's another point of the comparison that I want to make is, especially this year, like for Nebraska, when they lost in the Final Four, for a lot of teams, getting to the Final Four, not necessarily winning, but getting to the Final Four is a tremendous accomplishment. But for this program, it's national championship or bust.
Exactly.
You know where else national championship or bust lives? Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Yep.
Almost every year, it's national championship or bust. There really is no better, clear comparison that you can make of just what the internal mantra is in this program, and that's a lot of what John Cook has put into this program.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just the fans, the players, Cook itself, they've earned this privilege to go to the Final Four, something that teams all around the country love to do and still feel, kind of bitter inside, just the fact that they didn't win the national championship, when in reality the season they just had is probably every single one except for maybe Penn State, Louisville, Wisconsin, like those kind of teams, best seasons ever. And for just Nebraska, that's just another season where, it was amazing, but they could have been this. They could have did that. And that's just shows just exactly where this team is at. And the Alabama comparison really is just kind of spot on with that.
Like Louisville in 2022, when they made the national championship game, they didn't win the game against Texas, but they made it there. And this was a team when DBK took over, they were, as I alluded to, a bottom feeder in the ACC. And look at them now.
Yeah.
Look at them now. But this is a huge loss that the sports world is taking. This has been a guy that has advocated for women's sports his entire career, 30-plus years. Good news for Nebraska fans is he's not going anywhere. He doesn't plan on going anywhere. He still wants to be involved in the athletic department. Sounds like he's going to be named special assistant to the athletic director. That's some of the rumors that have been talked about. I wouldn't be surprised if that's actually what happens. But there's going to be a very interesting development that will happen as to how the culture void gets filled. And thankfully for him and for DBK, assistant coaches are staying. Jalen Rice, Kelly Hunter are staying, which helps Danny out a lot. But it's that commitment to program. And I think that Cook really instilled that into all of his players and the support staff. I really think that comes from the conversation. He talked about this last week. The conversation he and Bill Byrne had back in 2000, going into the 2000 season, about him getting the keys to, as he put it, dream big. You see dream big literally everywhere across the program. You saw it in his goodbye graphic. Dream big is plastered on Nebraska volleyball. And when you dream big, that's really it. There really is no limit to what you can do. And that is what this program, and especially the current team, has really adopted. Because I'm probably off base on this only because I've only been covering the team for 2 years. But from all of the old highlights that I've seen, all of the old clips, this group just seems like it's so much different from every other team that John Cook has coached.
Yeah, he talked about, too, just how fun he's had these past 2 years with this group. And, again, that dream big really motto, that slogan, has really helped them out. I mean, going into just last season, everyone knew Nebraska was going to be good, but, with all the freshmen on their team, no seniors, they were like, they're going to be a good team, but not yet national title contender. They ended up losing one game in the regular season and making it all the way to the national title game. And it's just, he's created such an amazing culture there that even when he is retiring, the assistant coaches are staying. Guarantee the players are going to be staying. I don't think many, if any, are going to hit the portal after this. And that just really shows you, how much buy-in there was to his culture and how they still are dreaming big even if he's not going to be there.
To add on to that, too, I'm glad that you brought up the players and the people in the program. Look outside the program and all the comments that were made about him. Fred Hoiberg talking about how just the amount of things that he's adopted from John Cook. Amy Williams coming out with a statement. Mark Manning, Rhonda Revelle. I think I saw something from Will Bold as well. Matt Rule was talking about it. I mean, this isn't just an impact on the program itself. This is an impact on the entire athletic department. Like, this is a huge deal, and I don't think we've given it the oxygen that it rightfully deserves. Is this affects a lot of people, and a lot of especially the younger coaches, at least in coaching years, who maybe haven't been here as long. I mean, Hoiberg's only been here 6 years now, but Cook's been one of his biggest mentors, and you can tell as Hoiberg has gone along in his coaching career here that very slowly you're like, oh, I can kind of see some of those things that John Cook did that I'm starting to see in the men's basketball games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every coach at Nebraska would go to John Cook for any just kind of advice or help, and I'm sure they would send players there too, or have him come in and talk to their teams. And again, you have really seen these kind of effects these past couple years. You mentioned with Hoiberg, I can see some with Will Bolt and the baseball team winning the Big Ten tournament last year. I was covering that team for 5 days straight, and I mean they lost their first game, I think 15-2. They got run ruled.
That was a bad game.
And just to see their determination fight through that, I guarantee you, some of that has come with just some of the culture that the volleyball team has had or has faced in this past. And he really is just a great person to talk to, a great connection for these coaches. And I'm sure he's still going to be like that even after retirement.
So I know we're running up against time, but there's another thing that I think we really needed to bring up. And that is the relationships that he had with his players. I think there's no way that you can talk about John Cook in the last 2-3 years without bringing Harper Murray into this, especially this past year. With everything that happened to her last offseason, and Cook basically walking in and stepping in as her father figure for an entire season. I mean, the last time that Cook walked off the Devaney floor after that Wisconsin Elite Eight game, he was with her trying to console her because she was very emotional for whatever reason. But after he was done, he was kind of like taking it all in. But you could see different moments throughout the season, and I got to give a lot of credit to some of the photographers that have been releasing photos over the last couple of days of that relationship. There was one on senior day where they were talking to each other on the bench. There was one at the pink out game when they were playing Rutgers. They were sitting next to each other at the bench, and Cook had his arm around her. Like, you could tell that there was something the TikToks. We haven't even talked about that. Like, that's something too that just his relationship with his players has just been incredible, especially with that one when he called her in first before talking to the rest of the team, and she couldn't control herself before he even finished saying retirement. I think that shows the impact. And then her statement that she put out a couple days ago, the fact that this has been a relationship that's been ongoing for 7-8 years, going back to grade school. I mean, he's been a big part of her life, and I think that that's something that a lot of the current players are really going to miss.
Yeah, and I think that's really kind of the biggest part, or the biggest thing at the end of the day. Like, yes, the championships are great. Yes, all the wins are great. But just the relationships and bonds he's been able to form with his players, especially like Harper Murray, how much she has gone through this past year, and just him just always being by her side. And like that with so many other players, that's really the biggest takeaway. And yeah, it's just it was been an amazing career, and it had a lot of amazing memories.
There's going to be a lot to reflect back on. If you haven't gotten a chance to watch his farewell press conference, highly recommend doing it. There's a lot in there that obviously we can't get to, but I think that there's going to be a lot of clamoring for John Cook's name to be put somewhere at the Devaney Center, because the impact that this man has had on Nebraska athletics is you can't even try to compare it. It's one of one.
Absolutely.
It really is. So we're going to take a quick sidestep. We're going to get to DBK next week, so make sure you come back next week. We're going to talk a little bit more about Nebraska's new head coach of the volleyball program. And then when we come back, we got a men's basketball surprise. And then Matt Rule had some words that I think are worth getting into here on Scarlet Fever. Welcome back. Hello again. We have some as what Ben put it last time, he said that there was going to be some not very happy faces when we talked about basketball this week. Well, surprise, surprise, no more losing streaks, so we can all just eat our words from the last one. Anthony was out at men's basketball last Thursday when Illinois was playing Nebraska, and I guess the grave site known as Pinnacle Bank Arena to Big Ten teams was just closed off for a couple of weeks because it was right back doing its old things, like for the Fighting Illini.
Absolutely. That game, going into it, just with the 6-game losing streak Nebraska was on before, playing against a ranked team at home, you knew that there was a chance, but you didn't think, Nebraska had all these chances these past couple weeks, and what would happen is they'd either get blown out, mostly in the road games, but they were competitive in other ones where it was, last 5 minutes, looks like you have yourself a ball game, and they kind of just let their foot off the gas, and they kind of let the game slip away from them. This was not a case. Last Thursday was not a case. This was Nebraska playing their best basketball at the best time. Granted, it wasn't perfect. Their offense left a lot to be desired, but their defensive side really turned it up. They had the hustle plays needed to get the win. PBA was into the game, and it was just, it looked more like Nebraska before the losing streak, back when they were beating, Creighton and UCLA and all those other ranked teams.
Yeah, it was. You could tell that there was a bit of a reality check. When they played Wisconsin at Kohl Center, it felt like that was more of a must-win game than a we can't lose this type game. And I think that Thursday when they played Illinois, that it was more of a we need to not lose this game more than we have to win this game. Because if they had lost that game, you go into Oregon, which they are playing in about an hour and a half at the time of this recording. You're going into Knight Arena in a place where Oregon's been very good this season. Oregon's a ranked team, and you've had your road woes. Probably not feeling all that good, and then if things go haywire in Eugene, you're really not feeling good going into Seattle to go play Washington.
Yeah, but now with that win, they kind of have some momentum going on their side, and the ranked win against Illinois showed them that we can do this. Like this is the team that we knew we had going into the season. This is the team we knew we had during non-conference play and at the start of Big Ten play. And I think this motivation and this confidence, newfound confidence, should really help them into tonight's game. Obviously, we'll have to see how that turns out, but this win against Illinois was really huge. It really kind of would make or break their season going forward, and they get that win. Now there's still work to do, but now they definitely have some confidence riding with them.
So here's another thing that I think is worth bringing up. Braxton Mia did not play against Wisconsin. At the time, it seemed like a timeout on the bench, you're not going to play. Doesn't play again against Illinois. What do you think is happening here?
I just think he's not good enough for the lineup. I look back to the Maryland game. He started, he played 4 minutes, never saw the court again after the under-16 timeout. And he played against USC, so it was maybe have been an injury, may have been a minor thing, but it's just at the end of the day, he's really only there to dunk the ball. I mean, he doesn't get many rebounds despite his 7-foot frame, and also just Andrew Morgan has really been the better center on the team. And even though he's 6'10", smaller than Braxton Mia, he really plays up to that size, I think. And he's definitely been one of the biggest surprises this season for Nebraska. And yeah, I mean, Braxton Mia, he has the tools, he has the frame that no one in Nebraska has had in years. But it's just a matter of if he can find a place on the court. And right now, I just don't see that for him.
So we'll get to Andrew Morgan in a second, but I want to stay on this point about Braxton Mia. Why now? Why didn't this happen? Because he's struggled all season long, and I get it. During non-conference play is one thing, especially when you're playing a bunch of bye games. You can work your way out of a rut and hopefully find your footing before the opening conference weekend or whatever the heck the Big Ten does with that, or before January rolls around. But he really never did that. Yeah. So why do you think that this first started to change, where things started to happen against Maryland, where he kind of played against USC and then hasn't played in the last 2 games. Why now? Why not earlier?
I think it just comes with the losing streak that Nebraska was on. I think you saw during this whole time they tried anything to try to, like, when it came to their starting lineups, they threw anything at it to see if anything would stick. They started Aaron Eulis for a game. That did not work. They've been starting Andrew Morgan and Sam Hoiberg these past couple games. I think they've had a new lineup ever since the Maryland game every single time, because Raleigh Rooster was out of the lineup for a couple games. Now he was back in. Berke Bayukangel was on the bench for this past game against Illinois. We'll see what it looks like against Oregon tonight, but I think they're just really trying to figure things out, trying to, maybe that's when they realized during this losing spell that, Braxton Mia, when he's on the court, Nebraska's just not living up to their full potential, and maybe that could be a scheme problem, maybe that could be his problem, and they just figured it was time to make a change, put Morgan in, and looked good to them so far.
Yeah, I think the lineup construction has been kind of interesting over the past couple of weeks. But Andrew Morgan is finally getting the time he's deserved. Yeah. I think a lot of people were clamoring for that for a couple of weeks. And in the short spurts that he was out there, he was playing, I think, pretty well. And people were recognizing, like, hey, Braxton Mia is not playing well. Hey, Andrew Morgan is playing well. Why isn't something happening? The Raleigh Wooster thing is interesting because he was benched. He started on the bench against Wisconsin. And it was like, really? He's going to get benched against Wisconsin? And then he starts against Illinois and doesn't really have a great game. He's been kind of hot and cold for about the last week or so. Has had a little trouble finding his consistency. But Sam Hoiberg is interesting because he got the start against Wisconsin, looked completely overmatched. And then against Illinois, I didn't think he looked half bad.
Yeah, Hoiberg, he's going to give it his all every time he's on the court. And that's really just what's needed for Nebraska. And I think definitely it helps. I don't like to say that, obviously PBA is a great home court, but I feel like some players really do feed off the crowd more, and that's who a guy like Sam Hoiberg is. So I think that, that it works in a home atmosphere. And you see like kind of these games where, he might not be having the best game, like scoring-wise. He's never going to be a guy who gives you 15 points. But on the defensive end, he's getting steals and stuff like that. And then Raleigh Wooster, you mentioned him. I think overall he got in foul trouble early against Illinois, which kind of deterred his play in the first half. He didn't play after the media timeout in the first half, played more in the second overtime. But I've really liked Raleigh. I don't think he should be shooting 7 threes like he did last game. He's a 24% free three-point shooter, so not quite sure about that. But in scoring-wise is iffy and all. But against USC, he had 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and that was a game where, he wasn't starting that game. So that was just very interesting. They have a lot of guys. They just really need to find the best 5 you can put out there, because it seems like, one of these games, Roosters does good, but Hoiberg does bad, and then the next game, it's complete opposite, and you just got to find the right chemistry fits.
All right, I need some Bryce Williams. What do you got? Because that was a pretty incredible overtime he put together.
Yeah, that's a game where Bryce Williams, he could have had 40. His shots were not falling. He missed a lot at the rim. A lot of shots, like he mentioned post game, that like he wasn't feeling like he was playing that good. But then in overtime, he just completely took over. Scored 8, had a personal 8-0 run by himself to put the game out of reach and seal it. And that's just the kind of player he is. He's one of the best scorers in the Big Ten. He has just been outstanding for Nebraska this year. He is far and away their guy. Like, they live and die with Bryce Williams. Juwan Gary's great. Hoiberg's great. Esiason is great. But Bryce Williams, if he is off, it's very hard to win games without him. And he just showed that against Illinois.
Do you think it's too far-fetched to say that, yes, Bryce Williams is obviously going to be the guy you want to get the ball to, but do you think there is a second option for a shooter on this team right now? Because I really don't think that way.
Yeah, when I look at like their scoring behind Williams, it really kind of depends. It's Connor Essegian and Juwan Gary are my two guys. Gary has really kind of stepped it up as of late. Against USC, he had 27.
I can tell that from a season ago, the offensive production that Juwan Gary has been putting out has definitely stepped up. He is in that part of his game, he is drastically improved.
Yeah, he's definitely gotten better every year he's been in Lincoln. And then Connor Essegian is a guy who, coming off the bench, obviously, I like his role off the bench. I don't think you need him in the starting lineup because, against Illinois, Nebraska didn't make a field goal until he got in the game right away, hits a three-pointer, gets the crowd into it. He's that spark plug off the bench. It's just a matter, though, of if he's going to be hot from three-point land. Against Wisconsin, he only had 8 points, 2 of 7 from three. Even against Illinois, he was only 2 of 6. But he has shown multiple times earlier in the season that he can definitely be a threat from deep. And he's definitely, Fred Hoiberg was talking about it back in the USC game when Juwan Gary had his 27 points, that the team scouting report, you look at Bryce Williams first, and then Connor Essegian's always that second guy. So I think it's definitely a lot of pressure now on Juwan Gary more than ever as teams start to kind of figure Williams and Essegian out. It's really up to him to kind of score his own.
So we got one more thing to get to in the show, but before we do that, any more quick hits on the Illinois basketball game?
No, it was a game that Nebraska should have won. They played way better than Illinois. Illinois got back into it. That's what a ranked team does. That's what a team that will be in March Madness does. But Nebraska pulled away at the end, and that's showed me a lot about this team, that even facing this adversity of a 6-game losing streak where they had these kind of situations and they couldn't pull it out, they finally were able to do so.
Very good. All right, we got one more thing we want to get to today. And Matt Rule spoke yesterday. There was a lot in there about Matt Rule, from revenue sharing to transfers, cutting the roster, every which direction. But I think the first thing that we really need to get to that is, I feel like is going to start becoming the norm, is there will not be a traditional spring game this year.
Yeah, he mentioned that he doesn't know exactly what it will look like right now, but he made some valid points in it, that Nebraska, definitely one of the most televised spring games. Attendance always does great for that, but, everyone, just the demand of Nebraska football is there. And while it's great for the fans, also other teams see that. And other teams can see, what players are having good games in that game, what players do they think could do good on their teams. And that's where just this tampering comes in. There's really just no regulations for it in college football right now, which he mentioned. And it's just, it makes sense not to have a spring game if that's what's going to happen. Is the only real thing from it is your players might get stolen now, basically.
So he makes a lot of good points, but I do want to get some, what personal takes on it are. I'll let you go first. Yes, the spring game is a huge part, especially in Power 4 football. Mm-hmm. It's not something you see a ton of in G5 and lower. This is more of a P4 type deal now. But how do you feel? How do you feel about that the spring game might start becoming an outdated thing?
I'm kind of indifferent on it. I think, to be honest, I've never really been a big spring game guy. It'd be cool, seeing the team play in April after not seeing them play in a couple months since, November or December. But I never really saw this as as big as event as, say, other Husker fans may think it'd be. So I personally, if this is what he thinks, if he thinks that, our players are going to get tampered with for partaking in the game, I'm totally fine with it, just having some scrimmages that week, not having it open for fans or televised or anything, just keep it like spring ball. I personally don't see too big of a miss with the spring game.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much either, but what I think is something that you have to look beyond the program a little bit is think about Lincoln businesses and tourism and whatnot. This has been the Nebraska spring game usually gets about 65,000 people. And while it's not the typical 83,000 that you get 6-7 times every fall, it is still a big influx on the local businesses, especially the downtown businesses, the hotels, the restaurants, the bars, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll be very interested to see as we get closer to this if that's something that's going to impact those businesses when you're not having flocks of people. Yeah, it's not your traditional game day, but you're not having those flocks of people coming down to Lincoln once a spring. Now I don't know what they're going to do yet. We obviously don't know. But if it's not going to be a traditional game, then the appeal of it is probably not going to be the same for some of those fans. There will be people that come regardless if it's open, but it most definitely will not be 60 to 65,000 people.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely something to consider for that, just the business outlook of it. But I think, honestly, Nebraska announced it and whatever, and I saw, people, tweeting, kind of clowning them for, oh, no one's going to want Nebraska players, stuff like that on social media. But I think this is really going to be just the new norm for college football. I think, Nebraska might not have a spring game, and, Alabama might not have theirs, and, other schools. I think that this is really just it really does stink for the small businesses and just that side of it. But I just think that it's really kind of inevitable at this point. Spring games are really just phasing their way out.
Yeah, tampering has gotten pretty bad, and
Yeah.
I think that's a big reason why the spring games are getting are getting kind of riding off into the sunset, so to speak. Another thing too that we can get into, and we can obviously go into it as deep as you want, but revenue sharing was also brought up.
Yep.
Got any quick hits on that?
Just very interesting to see, how Rule sees it and how he sees his players, how he was talking a lot of the revenue at other schools isn't quite sustainable, whereas Nebraska definitely is. He credits 1890 a lot, which, again, is something that's very interesting to see in just this evolving era of college football and just college sports in general, how big 1890 has been for the university and how, all the coaches really give them their credit for it. So, yeah, it's just we're in uncharted territory, something we never expected to be talking about, 2-3 years ago. But I think that Rule has done a good job of navigating it.
Yeah, I think a lot of Nebraska's coaches have done a good job at navigating, not just Rule. I think that Rule has had a really good look at this, especially with his experience in the NFL, where a lot of companies are trying to come in and sell to the players to go do marketing deals and show up in commercials and whatnot. And things can always happen in there. But I get that, the professionals are so much more different than the college kids because there's a lot more red tape to go through with the college athletes. But I think that's where he kind of has a leg up on some of these other career college coaches, brought up Alabama, like a Kalen DeBoer, who's been in college his entire career, or there's tons of other head coaches or even just coordinators or what have you in college football that have been in college football and not the NFL, or the Ferences. Same deal there. Or you could go to Brett Bielema too. All of these guys have always been in college, but Rule got that experience in the NFL. So he kind of has an idea of what exactly is going on. So I think that's where he has maybe a little bit more intuitive knowledge of what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. And I think he's really had, the college experience at Temple and Baylor and then the NFL experience. And he just makes sure he does a good job of just managing both and really incorporating both into his philosophy and what he's trying to do. I know when he got here, he was like, we're not a transfer portal team. We're, I'm all about, getting high school recruits and developing them. And while, yes, that's still one of his big motives, when he sees this offseason with what the transfers portal is doing, he's quick to adapt. Nebraska's brought in a lot of transfers. They've lost a lot of that's with the roster limit. But, he's being aggressive in the portal as well.
Yeah, what do you got on the roster limits, too? Because I know that was a big point of discussion.
Yeah, that was another very interesting thing he talked about, just how he's managing getting down to the 105 limit. And
because they're at 126 now.
Yeah,
right?
126. And he just was talking about how, a lot of these guys, they might not be the starters. Like Roman Mangini, he brings up as just a culture guy, a guy who will be on the team next year, and just what he does for the scout team, what he does in the locker room. And I think that's a very interesting thing to talk about as you think about this 105 limit, what this means for walk-ons and stuff like that. But as you can see, there's guys like Mangini who have really found a home in this program and has been very respected by his peers, even if that means he's not, making plays on Saturdays. It's really shows you kind of just what Rule values and how he values these roster spots.
I saw this, I think this was from Mitch Sherman, about how Rule wants to do his roster construction. And it was something like the first 57 spots are going to be like an NFL depth chart.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the next like 30, 35 would be like practice squad. And then your last 10 are like role model guys. What are your takes on that?
I think that's a good way to see it. I think, he did mention as coach of the Panthers, he had to bring his roster down to 53 every season, stuff like that. And, this really kind of similar. Obviously, the 105 is much greater in that scheme, but there's more players he has to deal with, and it's just some unfortunate conversations he's going to have with players. I mean, he talked to a lot of players beforehand saying that if we were to go to 105 today, if they would be on the team or not. And, some players heard that and they went in the portal. Other players are like, no, I'm staying here and I want to earn my spot. And that shows you a lot about the culture of Nebraska, and it shows you just what that means and how big these spring ball is going to be, even if it doesn't have a spring game or anything like that. It kind of just shows, he is really just taking it like an NFL team, and I think that's really going to be beneficial.
And I think that's also where Rule has a leg up being a head coach in that NFL. But I also got to give him credit for actually like standing up to the guys and being like, hey, you might not make it. What do you want to do? And not just like having them sit and wonder.
Yeah.
Any other big notes from his press conference you want to get out?
Just gave a lot of stuff, a lot of good, stuff to think about. Obviously, special teams, haven't found a coordinator yet, but I really do think the addition of Kevin Gallick, he's really hyped that up, which I think so too. I think it's worthy. I mean, just look at some of the look at pretty much every John Hole missed field goal last year. A lot of it came from the snapper. A lot of it came from bad snaps that Brian Buschini had to try his best to save. So I think that he obviously was a great long snapper at New Hampshire, and I think that would translate to Nebraska. So
there's a lot from Rules conversation that happened on Saturday that we can probably draw on for a couple of weeks still, because obviously spring availability is a lot different than it is in the fall, so we'll be able to drag that out a little bit. But that's going to do it for this edition of the show. Lot we did today. There's going to be a lot to come to continue. We will have more basketball talk next week, and we will probably get a better look at what Danny Busboom Kelly has for the volleyball program, as this is going to be an ongoing story throughout the entire spring, really until probably the spring game comes around, where there's actually focus on the players themselves. So there's going to be a lot to get to with all of this, because it is such an encompassing story. But it's been this was probably the biggest news drop in probably 30 years when Tom Osborne retired.
Oh yeah,
without question.
About it. Yeah,
it's still a crazy thing to think about, that there will be someone better dressed coaching Nebraska. We will be seeing the red suits all over the place. You gotta give DBK credit. Someone's dressing her really well, and it might be herself. We don't know. I'm no fashion police, but John Cook finally gets to ride off into his sunset.
Yep.
But the one thing I will give him credit for before we hang it up, I like that he's not going anywhere, but he did make a note in his press conference that he is doing rodeo classes with Nebraska's rodeo team in April, and he's going to be helping to run that, which I think is absolutely awesome that he's leaning into this. You can tell he's leaned into his cowboy side more in the last 5 years.
Oh yeah,
it's been so cool to see it.
Yep, it's gonna be fun. Look out for Nebraska rodeo.
Oh, they're coming. They're coming. But speaking of things coming up, there's a lot of spring sports that will be starting. So those of you that have been around for a while, we're going to start getting some different sports in here from all of the different writers and reporters. So you'll start seeing and hearing some different faces that Anthony and Ben and a couple other people are throwing together. So they're having a lot of fun.
Yes, sir.
Wrangling the horses, as we're going to put it, because we're in the wild, wild west. Thank you for listening, watching to Scarlet Fever, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you take us in. As always, thank you for supporting the students and all that we work on, because we wouldn't be doing it if we didn't have your support. Thank you for everything, and we will see you the next time.